Chapter 33. Abigail. Abigail needed to hurry. If what little she knew was true, it was time to warn her mother. No doubt she knew. She had to know. There were soldiers coming, and this was only the beginning. There would be more. The time to flee had begun. She did not mind working for the coven, but not if her very life was being asked. The forest had given shelter for a long time, but no shelter can stand every storm, and there was a great storm coming. It would be best to leave rather than suffer the wrath of an armed military force. They were witches. Their place was not as soldiers in a war. Their place was now, and always had been, hiding. Trickery and cunning was something she valued. Even a foe who was going against you directly. In many ways one was already losing. It was important not to be seen as a threat. It was equally important to use elements like surprise, intimidation, and subtlety. They were going up against a blunt object, a raging bull that would charge through their fence and many others. This was not something you simply tried to outmuscle. Even with the aid of the undead, they were outnumbered. A witch might have more utility and options than a standard foot soldier, but at the end of the day, they would be struck down like any other. Their enemies knew what they were up against, and if they were coming still, well, it was best not to face them directly. She was a child. She had much to learn. It was almost certain her mother would not listen, but she had to try. "Mother, the forces of Xing are ready at our doorstep. They ready themselves for a war with us. Let us make haste. Let us make way from here, far from here." Abigail said this with an intensity not fit for her age. "Oh, blood of my blood, you have wisdom beyond your years. But fear not. It may be true as you say, they make ready for war, but not yet. They must make it past our wards and magical defenses, many creatures and the undead. There are spirits that aid us, and much they cannot pass quickly. It will take them time to reach us, at which point we shall no longer be here. It is as you say, ready the coven for flight." Abigail was pleasantly surprised. She was willing to run. She listened. "When may we go? My mother, we must travel fast. The soldiers have not surrounded us yet." Isidora raised her hand, bony fingers steady and her gaze inquisitive. "What has you so riled up, my little one? There is plenty of time. We shall make ready, but not before teaching caution when striking at the coven. We will ready ourselves for the journey, of course, but first we will ready a trap. Wards so expansive that many will be lost in its call. They will be driven mad by magic. They will kill one another, so well stricken that none may save them. They shall fight each other, and in this chaos we shall make our escape. It is safer this way. There is victory even though we flee. Do you see, child?" Abigail was worried about this. No, they would not get the chance. The wards of Maud were impressive, yet she did not strike them down. Nor were they slowed. They had some way of breaking the magic of the wards. That soldier with the witchblade was not impacted by her hypnosis either. So desperate was Maud that she used the water priestess as a distraction. It was not that she chose not to hypnotize him. She simply could not. Her wards did not work, nor did her magic. Abigail swallowed. Against such an opponent, what could a witch do? Were there others like him? No, it was best not to risk it. She had to warn her mother. "We must flee, mother. One soldier has some way of repelling magic. Maud's wards were as nothing in his path. Her hypnosis failed her, and she died without speaking to a witchblade. Maud was not careless or weak. She was a fine witch. We should learn from this. If the mortals have garnered some method to pass our wards, it would be best to flee. Better to survive, mother." At last the matron became angered. Her little daughter needed to know her place. "Abigail." With the utterance of her name, Abigail was forced to the ground by a binding spell. Abigail fell on her belly and was pushed hard against the ground. She could not raise herself up. Isidora had her name, blood, and overpowered from the start. Isidora gained strength from every death. Every witch of her coven gave her their power upon death, making her stronger than any witch. Abigail knew this. Well, none save Hecate. "Is this it? Were you hoping that we die to add to your power?" Abigail's defiance grew, now that she was in pain. The little one was a child still, and did not know when to hold her tongue. Isidora sent a flare of pain through the tiny blonde girl. The look on her face grew cold and distant as the little girl squealed in pain. Water dripped down from her eyes as magic went through her like venom. Snot fell from her nose, and her skin turned red. Abigail let out another yelp of pain before Isidora lowered her hand and gave Abigail a reprieve. "No, child. Whatever power I gain, I am but one. It is foolish to sacrifice the lives of my coven for minor gains. I am still flesh and blood. Even with the power I command, I may yet die should enough swords come. I will not sacrifice my coven which I have poured years and blood into. You may fear these soldiers, but I worry about other things. The true threat is to come, and preparations must be made. Our wards will hold. They must hold. See that they do. Go out and meet those who would try to break them. With the strength you have and the craftiness of your mind, know it is a task fit for you. Go now. Do not return or face death by my hand." Isidora wasn't joking. Abigail knew this. The coven was at its limit. It might soon all be over. Isidora was not willing to sacrifice her status and her position. Like it or not, she was finished. She was dead in a dozen ways. If the humans did not kill her, the Grand Coven would likely finish their work. Still, she had no choice. She was a captive of sorts, and for now, she had to bide her time and hope she could survive. Defending the wards would not be easy. Chapter 34. Coven's Reach. As far as things went on his end, Darius supposed he shouldn't be surprised by just how many wards they put up around the forest. Masks, markings, runes, or simply invisible spirits which defended the forest with their very existence. While the details varied, the end result was the same: cause harm or death to intruders. He had no delusions about what they were either. They were indeed intruders. This was not, nor would it ever be, their true home. They did not know this land like witches. Witches were in tune with nature and made impressive hiding places, even from other witches who might be looking for them. Some of the more impressive ruins turned out to be the inside hollowed out of trees, or in riverbeds, or hiding in high-up places. All the same, Darius did not need to understand nature, nor did he need to know this place, nor know magic. All he needed was before him. Someone capable of sensing wards and pointing out their general location. Then he would approach, armored in his prototype nephelite layered steel. In truth, it was probably weaker than something properly forged, but he did not wear it to be superior in physical attacks. He wore it because magic of all sorts let him pass when he wore it. The mightiest of wards fizzled and diminished. Darius could even take a small black throwing knife and toss it at any ward, causing it to detonate, only then to fail. The black blades were strong and effective. Physical traps, pitfalls, or poisoned wood were a concern as well. The mages Darius brought with him marveled at the blade. "How can metal undo spellcraft? Is this some new type of lead?" Darius lied. "Essentially, that's the principle. It's a trade secret, I'm afraid." The mages kept an eye on the blades. With those weapons, we could easily clear a path through the woods, where we could strike. The witches wouldn't likely expect our attack. Darius agreed and readied himself to clear yet another ward. They just attacked last night. They're probably readying for another. It wouldn't surprise me if they could not defend. It was clear they were not ready to defend at all. They must have thrown much at the town in an effort to kill them all in one swoop. Familiar and witch spawn were nowhere to be seen. The enthralled were likely deeper in the camp, being controlled by masks or magical deals. It was unlikely they would be near the wards. Once they started to see patrols, it would be safe to assume the wards would be minimal. For now, the simple task of clearing the way remained. What seemed better is the witches did not seem to know their wards were failing so spectacularly. It was a handicap to their strategy. They believed it would stop them, but it would not. It was a handicap which Darius had no shame to exploit. Before them was a clearing. The thick wood is coming to an end. By the look of it, there were cages of wood and fireplaces with cauldrons. It was a mess that smelled of burned flesh, along with the sounds of occasional moans. There were men and women chained to trees. Animals patrolled, and masked men stepped around looking for intruders, while ignoring the pleas of those chained to the trees, who were no doubt by now dehydrated. Darius leaned in to speak quietly to the magus. "Can you dispel the magic from those men?" The magus could, of course, but that was not the problem. The issue was that if he freed the men they would most certainly panic. The witches would know they lost control and the men might die. It would not be safe for them if I did. Witches could come for them, or worse. Darius didn't need to hear the rest. Do it, preferably when they are some distance away. After that, release as many as you can. Some of the men readied themselves. The magus wanted to protest, but supposed Darius had some idea. In this case, Darius was the commander, and even though not used to the structure of ranks, it seemed urgent that he be obeyed. The magus readied his mind and focused on the small group of 4 men patrolling in the distance. Without much difficulty and with a fierce widening of the eyes, he managed to break their control. The men immediately became clumsy and out of sync with the march. One of them screamed and threw off his mask. Another cried out for help. One took his weapon and started heading towards the wooden cages. Before he got far, a bat let out a screech and a witch came out of what seemed to be a hole in the ground under a tree. She looked about and saw nothing of note. Only then did she notice the men. The hypnosis had failed somehow. It was in almost pouting manner. She stomped over to them and raised a hand at them and spoke though they could not hear. The men tried covering their ears and screamed. They did not want to go back to being slaves. The magic was broken and they resisted as best they could. Those who did not remove their masks quickly came back under control. The witch commanded them to grab those who threw off the masks. They begged, but their words fell on deaf ears. The witch smiled, picked up the mask he had discarded, and slowly placed it upon his face. There was grunting and resisting, then silence. "Who do you serve?" the witch asked. The man, at last, stood to his full height. "I serve the coven." The witch smiled, then began inspecting them. What had gone wrong? It didn't seem like there was anything the matter with the mask. Perhaps one of the more foolish witches got careless and fastened it improperly. She suddenly felt ill, worse than she had ever felt. A hand was over her mouth, and she spat out blood with a gargled cry. Her heart was pierced and her throat was slit. The gloved hand over her mouth made it difficult to spit out the blood or cry out for help. She could not speak, nor complete her death curse. She was dead, and there was nothing she could do now. The men were nothing but a distraction, something to draw her attention. But the fool did not think of other messages. She sent out a warning without words to a nearby witch. That was all she had time to do. She fell to the uncaring ground, and blood leaked from her corpse. Darius removed the masks. The men did not react to him. It seemed whatever effect the masks had ended when they got too close to that black metal. He crushed the masks and slit the rope on the wooden cage. He did not drop his guard. There might be more. "Cut them while they sleep." Those most loyal to Darius had been told of their black weapons. The men Darius brought with him readied their weapons and sped through the camp. It was a smaller camp where they kept a fair amount of prisoners. He looked at those pleading from the trees and moved a finger to his mouth. He wanted them to shush. Some understood and quieted themselves. Others did not. However, the ramblings of chained prisoners were nothing to alert the witch folk, unless they got particularly rowdy. Darius looked to the magus, who pointed at 2 locations where he thought sources of magic might be. Darius witnessed his soldiers go in silently and come out quickly with nods, their blades covered in fresh blood. One of the women chained to a tree cried out in a harsh howl demanding she be set free. Repeatedly she wailed, until at last Darius came to her. She thanked him repeatedly for her rescue, until at last he punched her right under the jaw. It broke, dislocated, and he probably did permanent damage to her face. She passed out from the right nerve being struck, potentially suffering brain damage, and immediately fell unconscious. The other prisoners hushed themselves immediately in a mix of horror and awe. Once again he put a finger to the tip of his lips, bits of witch blood still on them. All became quiet. Darius motioned for more to come out. Then he spoke to the magus. "Be careful not to exhaust yourself, but free as many as you can, as quietly as you can. Keep some magic in reserve for an emergency, which will no doubt come." The magus nodded and looked at the woman with blood dripping from her mouth and dangling from a chain. That was unnecessary and ruthless, but he supposed it worked. He looked to watch the commander walk away. He obeyed and made his way to the cages and those chained. He decided to save the unconscious one last. He made his way around the camp. It would not take too long to rescue them. He realized the kind of man he worked for now. He couldn't decide if he was glad or not that they had this commander. He was exactly what they needed against opponents like witches. On the other hand, he looked at the bleeding woman. May just grit his teeth and got to work. Darius went through the camp with his arms folded behind him and studied it while taking whatever mental notes he could about the structure of the place. It might be safe to assume that the main camp of witches might be something like this. This was one clearing, but he had a feeling there were many more. They probably had to spread out where they could, having small groups run different parts of the wood. A cry caught his attention. It was a child, a girl in rags running away from a monster. A bear in a mask bit at her as she ran, making sport of watching her squirm. Darius had no sympathy for the beast, and he tossed a black blade right into the bear's nose. It roared with pain and charged him with newfound fury. He sidestepped and chopped at the side of the bear. He expected another attack, but the bear had enough. It bled profusely and limped into the woods. Darius did not let it flee. He raced towards it and threw another blade into a leg. Then he swung his sword repeatedly with controlled force into the lower part of the bear, aiming for the heart and lungs. Bears' hearts were in an odd place, but he didn't need to be perfectly accurate to kill. The lungs were punctured and the beast fell. Any beast, even a bear, could not get far with a failed lung. He reached for the nose and pulled out the blade, then reached for his blade in the leg. He did not kill the beast because he wanted to, nor did he do it because it was controlled by witches. He did it because one of his blades would have gotten away. He turned to the girl who wept on the ground. "They took everything! They took everything! It's not fair!" Darius looked at her and said, "Stand up." The girl cried louder, but then Darius grabbed her by her cloak and picked her up. He readied a black blade and pressed it against her skin. His eyes narrowed at what he saw. The girl reacted violently. Her veins shot out and pain filled her. The magic within her screamed to get away from that blade. Anger flashed in her face, and Darius coldly looked her over. "You are little for a witch. What's your true age?" She let out a howl, and then out of the woods came a great familiar of a cat. Quickly it darted around and headed for Darius to protect its master. Darius choked the child with one hand and held out his sword with the other. He made certain the child could not speak and seemed indifferent to the idea that she might die. The beast came at him and slowed as it came near the black weapon and armor. It had trouble coming near him at all. It snarled and attempted to attack anyway. It took only a quick slash of the black blade, and the head of the monster splattered into ooze as he swung. It did not kill the monster. As long as the heart remained within it, it would live. Darius kept his distance and played defensively. He took a look at the girl who was passing out from lack of air. He said to her, "Dismiss it, or I will kill you." She grit her teeth and closed her eyes. The beast shifted and warped. It shrank down and gave off smoke until at last it was nothing more than a child's toy. Darius stabbed it with his weapon, and black magic seemed to flee from it. He loosened his grip on her throat, letting her cough. He threw her to the ground and took out a small blade. She held up a hand. "Wait, I can help you. They kept me prisoner." Darius nodded and said flatly, "I believe you." All the same, he took the knife and plunged it into a leg muscle. She let out a yell and grit her teeth. Tough little thing, wasn't she? "I can't allow you to run away. That wound to your leg should keep you from going too far." She looked to her leg, and her muscle was cut to the point where repairing it even with magic would be difficult. She groaned again, but tried her best to control herself. She used her magic within to quiet the pain. Then she focused on healing the leg. It would not heal quickly, but it did not need to. She just needed to start now. Darius made it clear, "If your leg heals, I'll cut your other leg." She got wide-eyed. Was he insane? No, in fact it was the opposite, and she knew it. Cruel as it was, it would keep her from running away. It would make it difficult for her to betray him. No doubt she'd be brought in for questioning. Her mother had basically doomed her, but she had one bit of satisfaction in this. If her mother faced an army of men like this, she was doomed. She breathed as best she could while gripping her leg. "The main encampment isn't even a mile away. I can tell you where to find Isadora." Darius nodded. "Very good." Then he picked up the child and began to carry her away. It was time to return the witch blades and ready the encirclement of the witches. Darius, however, did not see a bird familiar in the sky that was keeping watch over the little girl. It stayed far enough away to observe, yet not close enough to be noticed.